I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. We meet tonight on the brink of a major conflict in Ukraine. The diplomacy we urged on the 17th of February is failing. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine stands breached. The Charter of the United Nations continues to wilt under the relentless assault of the powerful. In one moment, it is invoked with reverence by the very same countries who then turn their backs on it in pursuit of objectives diametrically opposed to international peace and security. In the last two meetings on the situation in Ukraine and the buildup of forces by the Russian Federation, Kenya urged that diplomacy be given a chance. Our cry was not heeded, and more importantly, the Charter's demand for states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered has been profoundly undermined. Today, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine has been effected. Kenya is gravely concerned by the announcement made by the Russian Federation to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent states. In our considered view, this action and announcement breaches the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We do not deny that there may be serious security concerns in these regions, but they cannot justify today's recognition of these regions as independent states, not when there are multiple diplomatic tracks available and underway that have the ability to offer peaceful solutions. Mr. President, this situation echoes our history. Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. We rejected irredentism and expansionism on any basis, including racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural factors. We reject it again today. Kenya registers its strong concern and opposition to the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. We further strongly condemn the trend in the last few decades of powerful states, including members of this Security Council, breaching international law with little regard. Multilateralism lies on its deathbed tonight. It has been assaulted today as it has been by other powerful states in the recent past. We call on all members to rally behind the Secretary General in asking him to rally us all to the standard that defends multilateralism. We also call on him to bring his good offices to bear to help the concerned parties resolve this situation by peaceful means. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Kenya's respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Я благодарю.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I would also begin by, first of all, thanking USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing to the Council. Mr. President, the decision by the Russian Federation to recognize the non-government-controlled regions of eastern Ukraine and to send in troops have stunned the world. Ghana deeply regrets the decision of the Russian Federation to turn its back on the Minsk agreements and the dialogue required to address concerns over the implementation of the agreements. When Ghana joined this organization in 1957, we were under no illusions that the international order was perfect. However, we were convinced, and still are, that the principles of sovereign equality of states, which constitute the basis of this organization and our multilateral order, is the veritable foundation for a stable world. We believe that the United Nations represents the best attempt at maintaining peace across the nations, forging relations and cooperation between and among our peoples, and holding forth the prospect of a better tomorrow. It is for this reason that Ghana, like many other members of the organization, has solemnly committed itself to uphold the Charter and international law. We believe that through multilateralism we can improve cooperation to make the world a better place for its citizens and for generations unborn. Through this organization and our common actions on principles such as self-determination within the context of the United Nations, the countries that existed under colonial rule have been assisted to become sovereign and politically independent states. By its sheer convening power, this organization has set out a pathway for dialogue for all its members, regardless of differences in political ideology, and encourage the development and maintenance of friendly relations. By the actions of this organization, the rights of people across the world have become more respected by their governments, and their well-being better guaranteed. Mr. President, I will be clear. Ghana supports the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, the borders of which it joined the United Nations as a bona fide member. We do not support any actions that violate Ukraine's sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity. By our principles, Ghana does not recognize any entity outside of the clear arrangements that have been established by the Charter and the principles of international law for the recognition of states. As an international community, we have pulled back from many dangerous scenarios when logic and reason have prevailed. And on this occasion, we re-echo the voice of the Coalition of Peace for Restraint by all parties. While the sound of war may be loud, the voice of peace runs deeper. We urge restraint on all unsettled but accepted situations across the globe and remind member states of the need to protect the collective security mechanism, which requires adherence to the core principles of the Charter and international law. The true test of greatness lies not in one's ability to use power, but in the capacity to constrain its use when that would be an obvious choice by those of a lesser capacity. We hope that within this Council, and perhaps outside of it too, we shall find a resolution of the existing situation in Ukraine, and in a manner that does not impair the mechanisms for peace. While Ghana and other African member states have always held that the use of the veto power is anachronistic and counterproductive to the effective workings of our modern arrangements for maintaining global peace and security, that concern has never been rendered more acute than in situations such as the one we now see. Even though it may be enough on many occasions to say that we are against the actions of a member state, that goes against the international norms. On this occasion, we are all required to do more in reaffirming our common commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter. Besides the immediate cost of instability, all countries, including the most vulnerable in the developing world, may pay a steep price for the actions that destabilize a part of Europe. As we note with great concern reports of the foreign troops being sent across the borders of Ukraine, we reiterate our continuing concern over the situation of the civilian populations in Donetsk and Luhansk. We urge all parties to strictly comply with the tenets of international law. Mr. President, we may be at the precipice, but we have not fallen over. The path of dialogue and diplomacy still remains. We urge the reversal of escalatory actions and also invite the Secretary General to renew his good offices on the situation in the eastern regions of Ukraine in close coordination with the OSCE and all other relevant partners. I thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Габона.
I thank the representative of Ghana for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Thank you, President. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. President, over the last few weeks, we have regularly been called to monitor the situation on the border between Russia and Ukraine, with fears of military action and a ratcheting up of rhetoric by the parties. The call for sovereignty over the separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk have sent signals of imminent action. President, today Russia has announced its decision to recognize the sovereignty of the self-declared republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. This decision is heavy with consequence for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and it also undermines the implementation of the Minsk agreements. Gabon, which is particularly attached to the principles of the territorial integrity and national sovereignty, notes the attack on these essential pillars of international relations. We call on all parties to show restraint and to de-escalate and to adhere to the Pacific settlement of disputes in line with the United Nations Charter, and encourages them to use dialogue and diplomacy to avoid irreparable damage from the crisis. Thank you.
Я благодарю.
I thank the representative of Gabon. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Norway.
President, let me also thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing, and through her, the Secretary General for today's press statement. We are gathered here this evening because of the Russian Federation's violation of the core principle on which this organization is built, the sovereign equality of all its members. Norway strongly condemns the decision by the Russian president to recognize the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk and People's Republic of Luhansk in eastern Ukraine as independent states. Recognition of the self-proclaimed People's Republic is a clear violation of the Minsk agreements, under which Russia recognizes the non-government control areas in eastern Ukraine as part of Ukraine. The Russian Federation, as signatory of the Minsk agreements and as endorsed by Resolution 2202, has made a clear commitment to seek a peaceful settlement to this conflict. And recognition of the self-proclaimed People's Republics runs directly contrary to the work of the Normandy format and the trilateral contact group towards a negotiated peace. Furthermore, Russia's actions constitute a clear violation of international law. It has chosen unilateral action and military threats rather than diplomacy and dialogue. Norway urges Russia, as a party to the conflict, to fulfill its commitments to abide by international law and to return to the path of diplomacy. Russia's continued massive military buildup in and around Ukraine remains an issue of grave concern. Norway urges Russia to de-escalate by withdrawing its military forces from within Ukraine and from the vicinity of its borders. We commend Ukraine's posture of restraint in the face of continued provocation and destabilization efforts. Russia's decision to deploy forces in eastern Ukraine is unjustified and irresponsible, as it further increases tension. We are facing the prospect of a war that would not only threaten Europe's security architecture, but would also lead to unparalleled suffering for the civilian population. Norway calls on Russia to strictly respect and fully adhere to international humanitarian law. We call upon all parties to protect civilians, including humanitarian personnel and civilian infrastructure, and to facilitate safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need in Ukraine. President, let me conclude by again reiterating Norway's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its international recognized borders. Let me finally recall the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, which are now under threat by the action of the Russian Federation in and around Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of China.
Thank
you, Mr. President. Mr. President, China has been paying close attention to the latest developments of the situation in Ukraine. We fully elaborated on our position at the previous two meetings of the Council on this topic. At present, all parties concerned must exercise restraint and avoid any action that may fuel tensions. We welcome and encourage every effort for a diplomatic solution and call on all parties concerned to continue dialogue and consultation and seek reasonable solutions to address each other's concerns on the basis of equality and mutual respect. The current situation in Ukraine is a result of many complex factors. China always makes its own position according to the merits of the matter itself. We believe that all countries should solve international disputes by peaceful means in line with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Russian Federation. Distinguished colleagues, we've just now heard a number of highly emotional statements, categorical assessments and far-reaching conclusions related to the signing today by Russia's president of decrees recognizing the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. I'll leave the direct verbal assaults against us unanswered. Now it's important to focus on how to avoid war and how to force Ukraine to stop the shelling and provocations against Donetsk and Lugansk. From the statements of a number of our colleagues, one may get the impression that Russia's recognition of the LPR and the DPR took place suddenly, for no reason at all. Of course, that's not the case. It should be remembered that the DPR and the LPR declared their independence from Ukraine back in 2014. But we only recognize them now, despite the higher level of support for doing so, both in the republics themselves and in Russian society from the very beginning. At the time, the hope won out that the Ukrainian Maidan regime would think again and would stop talking to their own citizens in the east in the language of cannons and shooting and threats and shelling. Time and again, we firmly asked Kiev to listen to the aspirations of the people living in Donbass and the Russian-speaking residents of the country, to respect their entirely legitimate desire to use their mother tongue and to teach their children in that language, and also to honor the memories of those who liberated the land from fascists rather than those who fought on the side of fascists and had a hand in the killing of hundreds of thousands of people during the Second World War. After Ukrainian military adventures butted up against the determination of the people of Donetsk and Lugansk to defend their lands, the Minsk agreements were signed and the package of measures was adopted with the aim of implementing it. There was once again hope for peace and that the Maidan authorities would be sensible, having exhausted the desire to submerge Donetsk and Lugansk in blood. There was a particularly great amount of hope invested in the election in 2019 of a new president of Ukraine, who promised at long last to establish peace in Donbass. However, those who hoped that the Ukrainian authorities would take a peaceful stance were unfortunately mistaken. Kiev not only very quickly returned to its bellicose rhetoric and continued the shelling of civilians, but also did everything it could to sabotage and ultimately destroy the Minsk agreements. And most importantly here is the flat refusal of Kiev to speak directly with the representatives of Donetsk and Lugansk, despite the fact that this requirement is a central structural element of the package of measures. An unambiguous confirmation of an unwillingness to engage in that dialogue is something we've heard repeatedly from Ukrainian leaders in the last few days, including from the permanent representative of Ukraine during the Security Council meeting that we convened on the 17th of February to discuss the implementation of the Minsk agreements. After that, it became clear once and for all that Ukraine did not intend to implement the Minsk agreements, and I would like to recall and remind my colleagues on the Security Council that in all other conflicts, be it Libya, Syria or Yemen, we all demand and call for direct dialogue between the parties to the conflict. And it's only in Ukraine, for example, the Ukraine that is for some reason an exception to this rule. From some statements today, one may understand that a number of our colleagues are ready to bury the Minsk agreements. However, I would like to remind you that when the Minsk agreements were concluded, the LPR and the DPR had already declared their independence. The fact that Russia today recognized that in no way changes the makeup of the parties to the Minsk agreements, because Russia is not a party to the Minsk agreements. We have repeatedly declared this, and in so doing, in this regard, nothing has changed. It's another matter that the Minsk agreements, part of the provisions of which were supposed to be implemented way back in 2015, have long been openly sabotaged by Ukraine with the backing of our Western colleagues. And today we can see that many colleagues want to sign up to the idea that the Minsk agreements are dead, but that's not the case. And Kiev is still bound to implement them. We remain open to diplomacy for a diplomatic solution. However, allowing a new bloodbath in the Donbass is something we do not intend to do. Unfortunately, we are forced to note the extremely negative role played in all of this by our Western colleagues, led by the USA. Instead of forcing Kiev to implement its obligations, they have merely been openly egging Ukraine on, repeating the meaningless mantra that the obligations under the Minsk Agreement are not being implemented by Russia, which, as we've repeatedly underscored, is not even a party to the Minsk Agreements. Moreover, while for the last few weeks already whipping up unfounded panic around the allegedly impending Russian invasion of Ukraine, our Western colleagues have been unashamedly cramming weapons into the country, sending instructors there, essentially nudging the Ukrainians who have concentrated an 120,000 strong military contingent along the contact line towards an armed provocation against Donbass. The joint efforts of the West and Ukraine have inflated an air bubble that simply had to burst. In the past weekend, there's been a sharp increase in the intensity of Ukrainian shelling of residential areas of LPR and DPR, and the 1,600 shells have been shot. Civilians have been killed. The territory of the republics has been penetrated by subversive groups who have carried out or tried to carry out sabotage of critical infrastructure. As I already said, there are casualties from among the civilian population. The LPR and DPR have declared general mobilization. It's in Russia and not Ukraine that refugees have flooded to. Over the last few days, the number of evacuated women, old people and children has reached around 60,000 people, and Russia is hosting them and providing them with conditions for them to be housed and supported. There has also been shelling of some towns and villages on Russian territory near the border zone. And so it has become clear that Donbass is on the brink of a new Ukrainian military adventure, as was already the case in 2014 and 2015. We cannot allow that. That is why the Russian president heeded the opinion of parliamentarians and members of the Russian Security Council, and you know the rest. A detailed statement from our head of state about the reasons of this decision that has been taken was broadcast in detail by all the world's leading media. Today, it's true, we have heard an open distortion of what the president was talking about in his statement about history and the genesis of this situation, and about the fact that he allegedly said that he wants to reconstruct the Russian Empire. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to call upon our Western colleagues to think twice, to set emotions to one side, and not to make the situation worse. No one other than you can hold back the militaristic plans of Kiev and force it to stop the shelling and provocations against the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, which in these new conditions could have extremely dangerous consequences. In accordance with the agreements that were signed today and on the basis of their requests from the Republic, peacekeeping functions on their territory will be carried out by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Distinguished colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to note that in today's statements, most of you did not find any place for the more than 4 million of residents of Donbass. It's as though you've been cancelling out their faiths from your statements from 2014, generally calling them pro-Russian separatists. At the same time, you decided that the illegal coup in 2014 only wanted to discuss with the new authorities how their rights would be upheld. That was all they wanted to do. In the last few days, with the sharp intensification in military activity from the Ukrainian army along the contact line, the lives of hundreds of thousands of women, children and elderly persons have once again, as in 2014 and 2015, ended up under real threat. And the main aim of our decision was to protect and preserve those people. And that is more important than all of your threats. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Ukraine.
Distinguished members of the Security Council, Under-Secretary, it is with unease that I will now remove my mask. And it is not because of the COVID virus. We are all vaccinated. There are vaccines for COVID. It is because of the virus that has so far no vaccine, the virus that hit the United Nations, and the virus that is spread by the Kremlin. The delegation of Ukraine has requested this urgent meeting to draw the attention of the Security Council to the illegal and illegitimate decision by the President of the Russian Federation to recognize the occupied parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine as so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Today, the entire membership of the United Nations is under attack by the country that occupied the membership of the Security Council in 1991, bypassing the UN Charter. The country that occupied parts of the territory of Georgia in 2008. The country that occupied parts of Ukraine in 2014. As stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, following the urgent meeting of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine have been and will remain unchangeable, regardless of any statements and actions by the Russian Federation. Ukraine unequivocally qualifies the recent actions by the Russian Federation as violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. The political leadership of the Russian Federation shall bear full responsibility for the outcomes of the decision taken. Recognition of the occupied parts of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine may be considered as unilateral withdrawal by Russia from the Minsk agreements, and well as its disregard of the decisions taken in the framework of the Normandy Fall. This step undermines peaceful efforts and ruins the existing negotiating frameworks. By the decisions adopted today and those that may be adopted tomorrow, Russia legalizes the presence of its troops, which have actually been in the occupied areas of Donbass since 2014. A country that has fueled the war for 8 years is not able to maintain peace as it claims. What will happen next? We want peace, and we are consistent in our actions. Today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has sent a request on the basis of the Budapest Memorandum to the guarantors of security of Ukraine, demanding immediate consultations. The meeting of the UN Security Council and the special meeting of the OSCE have been initiated. We insist on the full-fledged operations of the OSCE SMM to prevent provocations and further escalation. An emergency summit of Normandy 4 has been requested. We expect from our partners clear and efficient steps of support. It is critical to see now who is our true friend and partner, who is on the side of the UN Charter, and who will continue to deter Russia by words only. We are committed to a political diplomatic settlement and do not succumb to provocations. In accordance with Article 51 of the Charter, Ukraine has the inherent right to individual and collective self-defense. We are committed to a peaceful and diplomatic path, and we will stay firmly on it. We are on our land. We are not afraid of anything or anyone. We owe nothing to anyone, and we will not give away anything to anyone. there should be no doubts whatsoever, because it is not February 2014. It is February 2022. Another country, another army, one goal is peace. Peace in Ukraine, peace in Europe, global peace. Excellencies, we must do all we can to make sure that the problem of Donbass is resolved through implementation of the Minsk agreements. That was said here in the Security Council chamber just 4 days ago, said by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister in the chair of the President of the Council, with a reference to President Putin. President Putin, who has taken a decision that we discussed today as a threat to the rules-based order, to the UN Charter, in particular Article 2 of the Charter, as well as to international peace and security. Peace and security that the Council has been conferred a primary responsibility to maintain under the Article 24 of the UN Charter. And in accordance with the Article 39, the Security Council shall make recommendations or decide what measures shall be taken to maintain or restore international peace and security. The delegation of Ukraine requests the Security Council members to exercise the above duties. We invite the Russian Federation to reread again and again, carefully, today's statement, where the Secretary General considered the decision of the Russian Federation to be a violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and I thank the Secretary General for this powerful statement. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that it remains up to Russia to abandon its long-lasting strategy on Ukraine, based on threat and use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of my country, and re-engage in what we all have committed to, fundamental principles of peaceful relations enshrined in the UN Charter. We demand from Russia to cancel the decision on recognition and return to the table of negotiations. We condemn the order to deploy additional Russian occupation troops in the territories of Ukraine. We demand immediate and complete verifiable withdrawal of the occupation troops. Dear members of the Security Council, the United Nations is sick. That's a matter of fact. It's been hit by the virus spread by the Kremlin. Will it succumb to this virus? It is in the hands of the membership. Today, the Kremlin copy-pasted word by word the decree on Georgia of 2008. Word by word, copy-pasted, copy-pasted. No creativity whatsoever. The copying machine in Kremlin works very well. Who is the next among the members of the United Nations? The question is open. I thank you.
I, as President of the Security Council, am obliged to say this. I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. I start by thanking Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. Mr. President, only 4 days after our last meeting, this Council meets again to discuss the situation in Ukraine. On Thursday, there was consensus in the Security Council that the Minsk agreements, which this Council unanimously endorsed by its Resolution 2202, need to be implemented, including by the Russian Federation. Today, we are confronted with the very opposite from Russia. President Putin's decision to recognize the separatist self-declared People's Republics in eastern Ukraine is not only a blatant breach of Security Council Resolution 2202, but also of basic principles enshrined in the UN Charter. It is another flagrant and deliberate violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the instigation and fueling of the armed conflict in eastern Ukraine since 2014. Russia has repeatedly insisted it was not party to the conflict. Today it unmasks itself and shows that it always has been. Mr. President, my government condemns Russia's violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. With our allies and partners, we will take firm and adequate measures in response to Russia's breach of international law that will have serious economic, political, and geostrategic consequences. And I call on all UN member states to join us in condemning Russia's actions of today. Today's decision comes in the context of an unprecedented buildup of Russian forces around Ukraine over the last weeks and months. These forces seem poised to attack. We have seen a flare-up along the line of contact over the last days and efforts that appear to fabricate a pretext for a Russian attack. Moreover, Russia has declared its readiness to deploy troops in eastern Ukraine. The UN Charter is crystal clear. It unequivocally prohibits the threat of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of states. The current Russian force deployment around Ukraine can only be considered as a further threat against Ukraine's territorial integrity as a whole. Mr. President, I call on Russia to live up to its obligations as a permanent member of this Council, and I urge Russia to immediately revoke today's decisions and recommit to the Minsk agreements, and in line with the Normandy 4 and what was agreed on. Russia must not cross the international recognized borders of Ukraine. Moreover, Russia must immediately withdraw its troops from the regions bordering with Ukraine in Russia and Belarus. And I call on Russia to recommit to the rules-based security architecture in Europe, which has been built over decades. Russia's decisions have put this order under serious strain. We call upon Russia to instead return to the path of diplomacy, instead of shedding further blood. And Germany will spare no diplomatic effort in this regard, while steadfastly standing by Ukraine, its territorial integrity and sovereignty, and the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Germany for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.